walking every single day to get a coffee in the kitchen, and you pass by like the bow from Legolas and like Narsil and Duril, like all the swords from Lord of the Rings. Fast forward like 5 years later, I was like, I really want to get into Unreal Engine. So when I was told that I was going to make some weapons for the Rings of Power, I couldn't believe it. Like I brought beers for the whole team. I was like, so excited.
You created a tranquilizer gun for the latest avatar, the Way of Water.
I've always been a massive fan. Surely if I manage to get this portfolio done, like I'm going to blow them away. I'm going to be hired like straight after. No, it doesn't work like that at all. Yeah, I've never had so much anxiety in my life. Like giving up is not an option if you actually have a goal with it.
So you know about solo carry, right?
Yes.
It seems like that's the perfect way to describe your characteristics.
We are here with another episode of Bad Decisions Podcast, where we give you guys a backstage pass to the minds of creatives, entrepreneurs, and visionaries.
That's right. And today we have a very special guest. I always say that, and it only gets more special. Our guest today is a creative 3D engineer. And if that term does not make sense to you, we're going to make it super clear because it's such a cool role. So just keep listening and watch this episode. He's known most notably for his work at Weta Workshop as a senior 3D modeler and project lead on really cool projects that you probably know of.
He worked on the latest Lord of the Rings of Power series. And he also worked on the latest James Cameron Avatar movie, The Way of Water,
which was so cool. We love that.
I love that visual.
It's amazing. And our guest is also busy the past few years on his own product, which you probably have seen in the Epic marketplace. It's called MetaShoot, and it is essentially a digital twin of a photo studio developed as a plugin for Unreal Engine that gives ability to the creators to produce highly realistic renders in the easiest and quickest way possible. We got our hands on it, played around with it a little bit. It's super neat, and we're going to talk about that today as well. Everybody, please welcome Jorge Valle. Jorge, how are you doing?
How's it going, bro?
Hey guys. Yeah, really good. Thanks for having me here. It's awesome.
No worries, man. It's a pleasure talking to you. We managed to talk to you in a very short meeting, got to know you a little bit, and it's a pleasure to have you here because we're going to introduce you to our audience and talk to you about all the crazy, cool things that you have done in the past. But just going back to the very beginning of our intro, we said creative 3D engineer, and that was a question mark for me as well because for a lot of people, they know about 3D modeling, texturing, and all that, but creative 3D engineer is a super interesting term. For anybody that might not know what that role does, can you please clarify that and explain to everybody what that is, essentially?
Yeah, totally. So the creative 3D engineer comes from sort of like mixing all my careers, like my background and what I currently do. So I come from an industrial design engineering background, but throughout like the years, I've been doing a lot of like 3D modeling and like lighting, rendering, and so on. And I've always been really passionate about both sides of things, like the creative, the artistic, and the more like engineering, like programming side of things. So in the last years, I've sort of managed to combine both into this like creative 3D engineer role, which basically is programming tools for 3D software, but it's a bit of both of developing the like programming the 3D software itself, but also making the most out of the modeling and rendering side of it to apply it to the same workflow.
Wow, this is like an artist became a programmer or a programmer became an artist. So which one you're in? Is it you were first an artist who became a programmer or you were a programmer who became an artist?
Has been evolving sort of like hand by hand, but definitely I think I was more of an artist before I became a programmer. It's only been in the last few years that I focused more on the programming.
But you know what's crazy to me? That shows how talented you are because usually how people look at it is either you're logical or you're creative, right? You either fall into one of these categories. It's rare to find somebody who can do both because you really need to have a different thinking pattern when you're creative because logic doesn't really apply to creativity because creativity is just trying new things. It's an experimenting. Whereas with logic, it's a set value and you go with that, right? There's rules that you follow and you do both. and you're good at both. So how does that work? Do you have to switch characters? Is that a character you prefer? Do you prefer your creative you or the engineer you, or no? It's just it seamlessly works together with you. How does that come around?
I think in the last years I've finally managed to like merge both personalities, let's say, together. So now it sort of comes more natural. But before it was definitely like that. It was more like when you are programming, you are really like mathematical, really logical, like really square. Whereas, yeah, as you said, when you're creative, it's more about like what feels better, like what if I try this and so on. So I've managed to mix both a bit lately, but I think it all comes from pure laziness. So when I was doing like pure like art and creative stuff, I used to get really frustrated by things that were really annoying to do and would take a long time, like technical stuff that was really sort of like stopping you from actually creating things. And that's what got me into thinking, oh, how like surely there is a way of like automating this or like doing something in a script or whatever that can make this way easier than I do it manually, and so that I can focus on more the creative things. So that's how I started like more in the programming side of things. I think I find it's a really, really like interesting and useful way of combining both. Use the laziness of it.
No, that's Faraz. I think you should start taking some programming classes. Maybe you can up that level of your skills.
I need to be a little bit more lazy. I think that's the trick to getting into it. But it's fascinating, the concept of you trying to solve your problems at the same time and then being fed up until to the point that you're like, you know what, I'm just going to learn programming and make my own add-on and make my own plugin and figure this out. And we'll get to that because I'm assuming that's how MetaShoot was born, but we'll get to that in a bit. Farah, you were interested in his story because you're currently in New Zealand, right?
I am, yes, in Auckland, New Zealand. Yeah.
And I think you're our first guest who's from New Zealand. We had a guest from Australia, but we never had a guest from New Zealand. What brought you, because I think originally you're Spanish, what brought you all the way from Spain to New Zealand?
So I'm originally from Spain, as you say, and one of the main things, so there are two main things that brought me here. One is that I wanted to learn English, and I thought that England was way too close to Spain. And the second one is The Lord of the Rings. I've always been a massive fan.
I should have moved to New Zealand.
I know, because we're big Lord of the Rings fans, and if we had the chance, we would have done the same. What exactly? Can you elaborate on that point? Because I'm genuinely
the bad decision that I should have made.
That's a bad decision. How did that start? So what happened? You were young, you watched Lord of the Rings, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to New Zealand, or how did that all come around?
It was a bit like that. When I watched the films, like I've always been a massive fan since they came out in the cinema, and I've been like really like following the lore of the Lord of the Rings after that. And when I think it was 24, like 23, 24, I knew that I wanted to leave Spain and go somewhere to learn English and like speak it like natively, sort of, well, going to a native speaking country. And that's when I sort of like mixed both things. And I was like, oh, like in New Zealand, they speak English. Like I should totally go there and like know Middle Earth and so on. But I also had that dream of not only going to New Zealand, but I wanted to work at the companies that made the Lord of the Rings. So I was always had like Weta Workshop as the goal,
wow.
the thing that I wanted to do.
Wow. So when you moved to New Zealand, the Weta Workshop was not decided. I mean, they didn't pick you as their employee. So you just went there and tried and you got the job, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it took me.
So you moved there without the idea of you being inside Weta Workshop, or no, you just liked the company and you decided to move all the way across the globe. I love that. Okay. Please tell me more.
Yeah. So exactly that. I took this like year. It's like a working holiday visa that you can get in New Zealand, and you can work for like 6 months and sort of like travel around and be on holiday for the other 6. But I definitely miscalculated my chances. So for the first months, I was just like backpacking around the country, bought a car, and just was like traveling all around, sleeping in hostels and campsites and stuff. And I had with me my laptop. And during that time, I was developing a portfolio that I could showcase to Weta at some point. And the thing is, up to that point, I had been working as a product designer. I was in the furniture manufacturing industry, but I had done a bit of like 3D visualization for products and so on. But it was that feeling of like I knew that what I had or what I could show at the point, it was not all that I could do. Like I knew that I could do more than I could show. So I dedicated those like 6 months to focus on making a portfolio that could actually showcase what I knew I could do and hopefully get a job at Weta. But that extended for way longer than I thought. I got really engaged in that project of the portfolio. I started building. I went too overboard with it. I made this 3D scene. It was like a 3D studio where I put like all sort of like a digital representation of my dream studio. So I had like a laptop or like a computer there, a 3D printing, a workbench, a photo studio, which is that photo studio was actually the early beginning of MetaShoot, years before MetaShoot happened. But yeah, I had this sort of like 3D studio, and then I recorded an animation inside showcasing everything that I had done inside that studio. So like I had all the products that I designed were inside that 3D studio, and then like the 3D printing, I rigged a 3D printer and I animated how it was printing the design that I had made and so on. So it was like virtually like or digitally showcasing everything that I knew I could do. And that was great. Like I loved that project, but it took me in the end like almost 1 year to finish. And by the time I finished, my visa in New Zealand ran out. So definitely miscalculated that. I had to come back to Spain, to go back to Spain. And then from there, I was quite stubborn with the idea. I knew I didn't want to give up. So from Spain, I was trying to find a way of getting back to New Zealand. And I found this job with Miles Montgomery at a 3D architectural visualization studio. So flew back to New Zealand, got my work visa there. And from there, I was working for like 1 year, creating renders of architecture and so on. And while I was there, I finally managed to get a call from Weta and did the interview and managed to get the job.
Hold on.
Yeah.
First of all, I've seen that studio that you're talking about with Farhad. We saw it. It's up on your website, right? That goes through the 7 different processes of what you worked on. And I'll mention this for anybody watching or listening, which included concept design, 3D design, 3D printing, industrial engineering. And that was the technical part of things, like the technical plans, the manufacturing process, which is where you go, I assume, more away from the creative process and more on the logical part of things. And then going to product visualization, which was what led you to the birth of MetaShoot that we're going to cover in a bit. And then editorial and graphic design. And finally, web and app development. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you did actually take part in all of these things, and you've actually had your foot in all of these processes.
Yes, 100%. So I did everything that's in the video. I was actually doing the back end of it. Like I did the whole app development, the whole web development from scratch, programming everything in JavaScript from scratch. Like,
how did you learn all of this?
Many rabbit holes there.
How did you learn all these different skills? Like YouTube videos, online, or?
Yeah. So the degree I studied was industrial design engineering, but in there I learned a lot about materials and that sort of like more technical stuff, more real world stuff. But at the same time, I've always been really passionate about learning on my own. So I was following like all sorts of tutorials for like programming, for like design, for 3D, for graphic design and all that. So it's always been like quite self-taught in that sense, or like internet taught, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And when you're saying internet thought, is there a specific place you went to for learning? Was it YouTube or Udemy or one of these websites that has the courses?
I've never bought like any lessons or anything, to be fair. It's always been mainly like YouTube stuff and like free access resources. I definitely, when I was doing all that, I couldn't afford any of the paid content. So I think I found my way of doing it for free. That's
great to hear, because for a lot of people, they might have been, or they might be, as we're listening to this and watching this currently, in the same situation where they can't afford to get a course and pay for a course. It just shows how much great free content there is out there to learn programming, to learn web design, to learn artistic things, and manufacturing design, right? All of these things. But let's go back to the portfolio. So you created this amazing portfolio, and we'll link it down in the description on YouTube for anybody who wants to go and check it out. But I want to know how much of this portfolio actually impacted your application in Weta Workshop, because you said you were there for a year, you were working on this, you were building this portfolio. Did you apply at that time during that 1 year, or no, you went back and then you applied once you had everything completed and you waited for a long time? I'm only asking because I know there's probably going to be people who want to apply to big film studios, big places like Weta Workshop.
And they are thinking of their portfolio. Is it complete?
Exactly.
When should I do it? Should I add more? Is it perfect?
So I applied as soon as I finished it. I think I probably waited too much to apply. I feel like, because at the time I was quite idealistic in thinking, oh, surely if I manage to get this portfolio done, like I'm gonna blow them away, I'm gonna be hired like straight after. No, it doesn't work like that at all. Like obviously you have to account for the necessity from the studio. Like they are not always in the need of hiring people, so you have to account for those times that it's just you have to be there at the right time when they actually need someone with those skills. So I applied originally like 1 year pretty much before I actually got hired. I went from, I think I had an email or like, no, I had a couple of applications at the beginning that were pretty much ignored. And then the third one, I went through the process. They called me. I flew to Wellington. I had an interview. And then it sort of like died there for several months, which drove me like, yeah, I've never had so much anxiety in my life.
I can imagine.
Waiting for that answer. And then a few months after, I reached out to them again. And they happened to be at the point where they actually needed someone, and yeah, that's how I got there. But it's not a one-off thing. It's not something that you can just send a portfolio and think that you're gonna get hired. You have to keep trying to show that you can actually be an asset for them. And in the meantime, you have to work as much as you can to keep adding stuff to that portfolio or to your experience and so on.
Wow, that's so interesting, because people would think that, oh, you made a portfolio, you applied once and you got the job. But the truth is you actually went through a very difficult process, which you could have given up in the process. Maybe by the second email that they ignore you, you would be like, oh, they probably don't want me. They didn't like my portfolio. Maybe I go find another job in another company. But you were persistent enough to send go to Wellington, wait for a couple of more months to get that Lord of the Ring job. Finally.
Dude, it's so interesting. Farad is right, because we listen to a lot of podcasts ourselves, a lot of motivational podcasts.
We listen to Bad Decisions podcast.
Not our own podcast, I swear. We've been realizing that a lot of the common phrases with successful people is not about, oh, who is smarter or who's better. It's just who gives up last, right? If you can just take the most amount of stress and give up last, you'll be the most successful. And one of the best examples, if you know Mr. Beast, we were just talking about Mr. Beast and how he's like the top YouTuber and analyzing so much of his content. One of the reasons he's at the top is anybody else he started with just stopped doing YouTube. Not because they were not as good, they just stopped. And this guy just kept going, and he's consistently doing that. And it's just so relatable when I hear about your applying to Weta Workshop and not giving up, doing it twice, doing it 3 times, waiting again, and still being interested in the act of applying to them. It just goes to show what it takes to get a position at such a company. But sometimes you might apply the first time and get in, but it's a really good example of what you just talked about, because people need to understand that when you really want something bad enough, that's the way you get it. Because if you don't want it that bad, then you're probably going to give up after 2 times.
Yeah, totally. Like giving up is not an option if you actually have a goal with it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I've been preparing this question since
I know
we said
you've been killing me for it. Go ahead.
I want to know, what is the process of making a props for a Hollywood movie? So let's put an example. You created a tranquilizer gun for the latest Avatar, The Way of Water. Tell us from day one, from day 0, how is the process like? I'm actually interested to know how many revision it takes to get the final product, and what is the final day that it goes to the set? Yeah.
So I was in the 3D department of the props. So Weta Workshop is the manufacturing, 3D and manufacturing part of Weta. and we do the physical props. But because of the new technologies and stuff, the digital modeling has been a part of that process and growing bigger and bigger. So when the design gets to me, it has come already from the design department. The design department is basically like concept art. So they come up with like thousands of designs for each prop, pretty much. They draw all the possibilities. They have all the variations in mind. It's amazing what they can do in mainly 2D, like all drawing. And that goes through the production with like they see all the options. They start like tweaking a few of them, and we end up with like the hero design that finally passes to production. Once we get that design, is up to us from like the 3D department of picture how those 2D shapes adapt in a 3D world. Because that's something that if you guys obviously are familiar with 3D world, seeing something in 2D doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one to 3D. Like when you draw something, you can have like some sort of like MC Escher, like impossible shapes going on that a 3D modeler will go crazy about. So you have
Who designed this? Who designed this?
Can we simplify this a little bit? But you can't say that, right? You can't, was there times where you said, okay, this is not doable or it's too hard? You have to, I assume you have to take in whatever's given to you and get it done. That's my assumption, right? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Exactly. So it's not, I don't think it's a matter of saying this cannot be done. It's a matter of finding out how can that be done the closest possible to what it looks like. So it's really cool because it also pushes us to find new shapes and new ways of like doing things that by default we wouldn't have done to begin with. And the same with materials and stuff. I'll go to that later. But part of the job of like making a prop into reality, it's not only the 3D modeling, but also getting the materials right and then the manufacturing process and stuff. And that's where my industrial design background came pretty handy, because I was able to do both sides of the process, and it was amazing. So once you have the 3D model on the computer, you already do it thinking how it's going to be manufactured, which parts are going to be either like 3D printed or CNC'd machine, or use traditional machine methods that we have to account for as well. And once you get all that, you start prototyping, which is like I couldn't believe that was a job. It was like you're making toys for films, getting paid for it, and like for these massive productions. And yeah, it was so enjoyable. That's sort of like how it comes to the manufacturing phase, and then it's when you start like taking things and designing mechanisms and so on.
So you take in the ideas from 2D and then turn them into 3D models and then also texture them. And once it's textured, what happens after that? Once you have the model ready, it's textured, where do you send it off to?
So something like a weapon, for example, you have to design first of all, like what the shot for that weapon in the film is going to be. So it's not the same to design a weapon just for the background, or if it's going to be a hero weapon, something that is going to be interacted with, with like the actors are going to be able to open them or like actually have, I don't know, look through the scope or something. So once we know how that prop is going to be used in the film, we account for those things. So one of the rifles I worked on, the tranquilizer rifle from Avatar, that it was the project lead for that one. It's a hero prop that had to actually be opened with a full mechanism, being able to like load a dart in it, like a tranquilizer dart, and you see the whole thing in the film, and like close it and then look through the scope. So I actually had to design like the latch mechanism for it, which was 3D printed in titanium, which was insane. Like,
wow! Did you see the final product? Did you see the final product?
Oh yes, yeah.
Did you hold it?
Yeah.
Oh, you hold it?
Yes, yeah.
Did you take it home?
Yeah.
Did you steal it?
Did you take it?
I wish.
I would steal it.
I couldn't afford to steal that one.
Yeah, I understand. No, I understand. But my question is, how long did you spend on creating that weapon? Since you said you were the project lead for that, because we know production of movies and films and series can take a really long time, and there's so many people, so many moving parts. But for you working on that weapon, was that the only thing you were doing, and that's how much time was invested in it. And the reason I'm asking this is because I watched this behind the scenes of Transformers for like a 2-second shot. They had one small team work on it for a whole year. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. That's why I'm asking, how long did you spend working on that weapon?
So this one was not not as complex as some of the other stuff that we've worked on. And this one in particular, I think it took maybe like 1.5 months from once the design was done till it was like sort of properly like finished. But that's not only like the team behind that is incredible. Like it goes through prop making, which I used to work really closely with, which is like amazing to see like things coming up in real life, how they actually texture things, age them in the physical world, because we are used to like just create a shader, apply a couple of maps and stuff. They actually do that with physical tools and physical items and stuff. So it was a really cool comparison of both physical and digital. And then like the painting department, insanely talented. The finishing department, like you have to account for all the aging on top. Like you have to make it look like it has been used and all that. So yeah, prop like that can be.
That's like a mask and substance painter. You just drop it and then you get the age. In physical, that's super hard to do. It takes a lot of time.
Yes, yeah. Every like you don't have a pattern or like you can scatter textures. You have to go hand by hand, just making every single dot or every single damage. Yeah.
And so, then, Faraz, Weta Workshop had the whole departments to create this end-to-end. Means from, of course, the concept design all the way where the weapon is ready, you guys would do it end-to-end?
Yes, yeah. Weta Workshop has everything in-house. Like they've developed.
Can we visit your honestly, this is like a theme park. I cannot imagine you go in, Avatar, Lord of the Rings. You can leave me there for like a couple of hours.
Everything. When we check the website, it said we make cool stuff, right? That's what the website says, because it's true. The Weta Workshop just made cool stuff. I want to actually get to that, and I'm more curious about that. But just one more thing about the weapon. You said you had to actually use the weapon. Clearly, have you been to the army? I don't think have you done any service? Because like, how would you know how the mechanism of the gun works? Like, you had to study that as well.
So luckily, I have never done anything with weapons, but luckily the supervisor of the project, Lance Hansen, which is like one of the most talented people I've met. He's an industrial designer as well, and he has worked on like probably all the films that you've seen recently, like all the physical props. He's amazingly talented, and he helped me a lot with all that part of like the weapon design or like the mechanisms and stuff. He knows a lot about that as well. So he knew, for example, like how like the concepts of how a gun loads and stuff, and then applying those concepts into the 3D software and all that. So yeah, thanks to Lance Hansen for sure on that end.
Okay, that's pretty cool. And I just had to ask that question because I was wondering how would you design something like that. Clearly, you had experience with industrial design, but I assume not everybody doing 3D modeling there has. So for anybody who might be interested in a similar position in a film studio, would they also have to know about industrial design and the manufacturing part of things, or having the knowledge of creating models in 3D and texturing is enough for a position like yours?
So we had both things on the department, for example. Like we had mainly industrial designers with some 3D design knowledge, and we had 3D modelers with like not necessarily industrial design knowledge, but once you are there, it's like pretty easy to learn. For Weta Workshop in particular, being the manufacturing part, industrial design comes really handy. So if you know the basics of it and how physical things interact, and it's the same way that in the virtual world you can have things overlapping and like things intersecting and so on, that in the physical world obviously cannot happen. Which is sounds quite obvious, but it's not that easy to realize once you are starting making something in the computer to be printed. So you have to account for like tolerances and like how things fit, and if there is glue between them, you have to leave the exact gap for the glue and so on. So we had like tolerances like up to like 0.3, 0.2 millimeters that you have to account for things like glue and so on.
I can
So
guarantee
industrial
you,
design helps. Yeah.
I have zero talent in that because everything we have in our cinematics, if you just look at the topology of it and like if you try to measure it, it's
Actually, we should do a test. We should 3D print some of our models and
Please
see if
don't.
they stand.
I don't think they will because we really as 3D artists who don't do any of what you do, who just create things for cinematics or just YouTube videos, we don't really take all of those things into account, which is why it's so cool because that's the part you need to be more logical about your designs and you need to really think before you model something, which is something that is not easy to do. And clearly it helps if you're going to a position like yours. It clearly helps to have that knowledge. So it's very interesting. We talked about
Avatar, I was
now
looking
we
at you.
gotta-
You're not
yeah.
skipping Lord of the Rings.
No, we're not skipping. We're getting into that right now. Actually, we kept the best for last. So
Okay, so when you were asked to start working,
I
on
wanted
Rings
to
of
ask that
Power-
question, but he doesn't let me ask
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings question. He wants to take it
I'm
himself.
taking all the Rings of Power questions. Does your knowledge about Lord of the Ring help you in designing the weapons and the props for the Rings of Power?
No, I think it probably helps with the concept side of things, but it definitely helps with the motivation to get them
Okay.
done. Because I've never been more excited about a job in my whole life. So the first day that I was told that I was going to work on it, because the company works on several projects at the same time, and not always you don't get to work on all of them. So when I was told that I was going to make some weapons for the Rings of Power, I couldn't believe it. Like I brought beers for the whole team. I was like, so excited.
What
Yeah.
props did you work on for the Rings of Power?
So I was on weapons and mainly on the elves and the dwarves. So some of the
axes?
weapons. Yeah. So for example, the pickaxe that appears on I think it's episode 2 or something. When the dwarf is like they have this competition with
To break the stone.
yes,
With
yeah,
the elf.
that one.
Yeah, I remember that scene.
Yeah. So that's one of the axes or like the pickaxe that I
But that's
3D
a
modeled
hero
for the-
props, like you mentioned, right? So they had to make an actual one. That wasn't 3D printed.
That was originally 3D printed, but then it gets molded and casted into more durable materials and things that can actually withstand the hits. Yeah.
Okay, wow. So that was one, and you were saying there was another one as well.
So that was one of the props I made. That was sort of like one of the heroes that I 3D modeled. Then I made a bunch of like background or like secondary props, like some axes for the dwarves in the background, and then for Arondir, the elf, then the sort of like the protagonist elf throughout the series. I made the dagger for him, which is I love that design, and it only appears in the series for like 2 seconds. Like I've tried to like screen capture it, and there is not enough time to even capture it properly. But I really hope that it appears in season 2 again, because it's an incredible design. I don't know who designed this one actually. I don't know the designer who was in charge of the concept art of it, but the design is amazing. It's like this because if you get to know about the Lord of the Rings, the story of those weapons, for example, is that they are born, or like the elves plant like the metal piece on the trees, on the young trees, and then the trees grow around that metal, and then when the trees get old, they chop them off and they build. So the wood is like wrapped in the metal, so they build the sword out of that metal that has the wood around it.
Lore.
So the whole story is like the design follows the story, and the manufacturing had to follow the story as well. So for that one, we had to come up with a way of making the metal sort of like get twisted inside a wooden handle, which then got like casted and so on. But yeah, it was
Wow.
so exciting,
guys-
and I really hope that the dagger comes out again.
Are you guys involved in season 2?
I'm not sure what that's something that doesn't really come all the way to us. We don't know how much they are going to use the props. We know certain parts of them, but yeah, usually they get definitely more things for the next season.
What was the biggest challenge for you working at Weta Workshop? Because it does sound really exciting, and the projects you had to take on sound like projects that you were inspired and were born to do, because clearly you were in love with this project. You went to New Zealand just so you could work at Weta Workshop, but it clearly wasn't always easy, right? You're working at giant projects that are going to be seen by millions of people. What was the most challenging part about working at Weta Workshop?
Yeah, so definitely it's really hard, the pressure that you feel, both from the outside and internally. Personally, I like to push myself to get something like the best that I can do. And when you combine that internal pressure with a lot of external pressure, it creates, it's quite a tough job to do in that sense. The film industry has really tight deadlines, things like, so for example, if you delay one day in the production of a prop, because this is sort of like the pre-production when we have to send the props to the actors and so on.
Yeah.
Delaying the production for one day means that all the actors have to get paid for one day, all the extras, all the catering, all that. So it can be like, you can be talking about millions of dollars in general costs just for one day. So you have that pressure of like, you need to meet the deadline. Like it's not that you are just sending an email with a file, it's that you're actually sending a box full of swords to someone. So
wow.
That pressure is quite hard, yeah.
Dude, you know what's funny? Sorry to cut you off. It's every person we talk to who has some sort of footing inside the film industry says the same thing. We had this pro drone pilot on our podcast, Patrick from Peacemaker Film Studios and Filmworks, and they were talking about how even what they do is crazy stressful, because every minute they were working on Deadpool 2, that they had to work extra because there is a fault in the machines or anything that might have gone wrong. They might have to do another take. It's costing millions of dollars, which is crazy. If you just think about your time versus what everybody else's time is, I can only imagine how stressful that is. How did you deal with that, though? How did you manage to deal with that stress?
I think for me, realizing that I think most of the pressure came from a bit of an imposter syndrome going on at the beginning. You are in this like massive company, like they are the best in the industry. They've done all the, like in the last 20 years, the most amazing films and stuff. And you feel like, what am I doing here? Like how I must be surrounded by perfect workers and like perfect people. And then you start realizing that they are human as well, and everyone makes mistakes, and it's sort of like part of the job. So once you get that mindset of like not having the pressure of like everyone else around you knows more, if you have the mindset of like, if a problem comes, I'm just gonna fix it and keep going, and I know that I need to do that, it takes a lot of pressure out of you instead of thinking, oh, am I good enough to do all this and stuff, which for a long time I had in my mind.
Wow. It's you know, it's crazy. You remember your question for 1 second. I just want to say one more thing. The imposter syndrome is such a common thing between artists. It's so common. I believe almost everybody I speak to has that same thing that they're dealing with, myself included. So I didn't necessarily come from a creative 3D background. I didn't study it. I studied computer science. I didn't follow that through. And 3D art wasn't something I ever planned to do. I didn't have a passion in it. I was always interested in video games and in movies, but I didn't know it's going to lead me down this path. And so you remember this clearly, when I started my 3D art journey, I was even afraid to call myself an artist because I didn't think that I am an artist. I just thought I'm just doing 3D for fun. And it took me a really long time and a really high amount of content that was produced on top of my 3D journey. And then people saying, I like your work, until I realized, oh, maybe I can call myself, I'm an artist. Maybe I can slowly say it. A lot of people have that. And I think it's just something that goes away after time. You just have to put in the work, and I think that's the best way, to just do more work and it goes away. Is that how you also sort of got rid of the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think, and in some sense, I actually come to realize that I was probably an imposter. Like I was definitely, like if I look at the work that I was doing at the beginning when I felt most of that pressure, and I look at the work that I was doing at the end when I was like more knowledgeable and I had more experience and stuff, I look back and I was like, oh, I was actually an imposter. Like it was not a syndrome.
Well,
Like
everybody
I actually
is.
didn't know half of these things.
Everybody is at the beginning, right? Because you always start out as an imposter and then you sort of build that up. So I totally agree with that. Farah, sorry. Time for your question. Let's go.
I think I should stop myself. I have 25 Lord of the Rings related questions. You can stay here for another 4 hours. One final question. Did you guys go on set for films? For the actors to try the
I didn't.
props? Okay, you didn't go.
Some of the team at Weta Workshop, they work closer to the studios. They go there either to go with the weapons, and like some of the ones that have mechanisms and stuff, you have to explain how to use them. And some of them require installation and like proper setup. But I was sort of like more in the pre-production side. Like I didn't follow through once the props were out.
If I were you, I'd make the guns hard to use, so I would have to go and teach everybody how to use them. so that way I'll get to go on set every time. There's no way you can use this without me being there. I got to teach it to you myself.
That's a great idea. Yeah, like putting them inside like a puzzle box used to open.
Yes,
them. You don't know how to open the box?
Gotta take me to set every day.
Yeah. I was just gonna say related to the Lord of the Rings stuff, because that's something that I was like a kid about when I was at the company. Is like the whole building of Weta Workshop is full of like props from previous films and stuff, and they have all the props from the original Lord of the Rings. So I was walking every single day to get a coffee in the kitchen, and you pass by like the bow from Legolas and like Narsil and Anduril, like all the swords from Lord of the Rings. So it was like being like working at a museum of your childhood dreams.
Can external people do a tour of the Weta Workshop, or no? There are no tours, or
there is a part that you can tour. It's called the Weta Cave, and they expose some of those props in that part. And you have like the things like the Sauron armor, like the full armor, the helmet.
We're going there. We're going.
Oh yeah,
we are
you're gonna love
New
it.
Zealand. We're going to New Zealand.
I'm not joking when I tell you one of our top favorite movies is Lord of the Rings. It's just because as brothers, we're very close, so we watch all the movies together. Farhad had a movie collection when we were younger, a whole DVD collection that we had to get rid of when we immigrated. But he had his whole DVD collection. Lord of the Rings was probably one of the top most watched, like on repeat. And just all the wars and all the fight scenes were something we just kept watching over and over again. Even now, occasionally on YouTube, it might get recommended. And then suddenly in the middle of work, we're like, okay, stop, pause.
Let's watch the Battle of Helm's Deep again.
It's just such a fascinating series, and the fact that you managed to see all of the props, live, it's crazy.
We are so jealous.
One day, please, we need to make that tour happen. I would love to see it.
Oh yeah, if you come by, I'll be happy to guide you through the cave. I'm not at Weta Workshop anymore. Like that's a public tour that everyone can do. But I would love to go with you.
Don't worry,
again.
we'll steal someone's access card and then get inside or something like that. We'll find a way. But jokes aside, I think that was just a beautiful way to cover what you've done at Weta Workshop. I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now, what you're busy with now. And MetaShoot is a name that comes up. And we managed to get a demo of MetaShoot and what it does. And honestly, it's one of the cleanest plugins we've seen. One of the cleanest, don't even want to call it a plugin. It's probably a mini software of its own within Unreal Engine 5. And it's so clean, it's well thought out. But for anybody who's hearing that for the first time, can you explain how the idea came about? Because this is one part of what you do, the product visualization. Why did you start it, and who is this for?
Mm-hmm. So MetaShoot came to be, now it's that sort of like lighting and rendering visualization for Unreal Engine, but it started from that idea that I mentioned before of like when I was showcasing my product design and so on, would have been like 7 years ago or 6 years ago. I made this 3D studio, like photo studio, to sort of like take a virtual photo of the studio with one of the chairs that I designed. And fast forward like 5 years later or 4 years later, maybe, I was like, I really want to get into Unreal Engine. Like I've been seeing all the stuff about ray tracing, about like all the real-time interactivity, and I was amazed by it coming from Cinema 4D myself mainly. So I opened up Unreal Engine, and I started doing a few things with virtual reality at the very beginning, like the interaction and so on, which I really enjoyed. But then I moved into like, how can I start making the most out of the lighting and so on. And I was like, oh, I have this model of the studio that I made like a few years back. Why don't I import it here and like see how I can play around with it? When I imported it, I was like, oh, these models, they are like, I can definitely make them better now. Like I should totally like rework them. So back from scratch, I started with like Cinema 4D and ZBrush, doing all the soft boxes and all that. Like a couple of them, just to get a studio. At the beginning, it was just going to be like a 3D scene. And so I went back to it, made them like as realistic as possible. I even sort of sculpted the wrinkles in the fabric of the softbox. And
I'm gonna stop you right there just to say how realistic these models are. It's mind blowing. We did go inside it. I'm like, is that real? It looks freaking real. He's got like all of the soft boxes we have right now around us that you guys can't see, but in a behind the scenes maybe, they look exactly the same in MetaShoot. Like pixel perfect. Please continue. I just had to say that.
Oh, thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't even have one as a reference around, so I was just out of like internet photos, trying to get like the most accurate representation of them. And then so I made a couple of the soft boxes, put them, and then I was like, the cyclorama, like the backdrop is not as realistic as it should be. I made another one, and then I thought like, wouldn't it be cool, like knowing that Unreal Engine has that sort of like interactivity and so on. Wouldn't it be cool to make a tripod for the soft boxes that actually adapts to the ground and so on, and like just adapts in real time? So I started programming that, and at that point, I think I was just way too hooked on the whole thing. So once the tripod was programmed, like I modeled it and then sort of programmed it so that you could move it to any surface and it would sort of adapt to it. And then I thought, what if I do something for when it's closer to the ceiling? So I made this like scissor system that it sort of like expands and contracts when you move them closer and stuff. And at that point I was like, wait a minute, like this is actually really cool. Like surely I can make something to like put it out there and like make get other people to actually use it and see what they can do with it. And that's where the idea of the plugin actually started. So at that point I started sort of like thinking, what if I make some like lighting presets and like things that I can use with one click? You can get like the full studio with different lightings and so on. But then I thought, the rendering in Unreal Engine is really complex for a beginner. Like the rendering process is not really straightforward, because obviously Unreal Engine is made for like gaming and package builds and so on. But the rendering process, you have to create those like level sequences and go to the movie render queue, and the settings there are a bit obscured. You need to really know your stuff there. So I thought like, surely I can automate this somehow as well. So I started diving really deep into like the C++ programming side of Unreal Engine, going into like the documentation. This was before ChatGPT, I have to say. I think like that, but now it's, I think probably adds merit to the challenge. But yeah, it was just like really enjoyable to get to know both how to do that, but also to understand how Unreal Engine works in the inside, and have that sort of like insight of how the different modules work, how the different interaction, like the editor works and so on. So yeah, after all that was like on the way, I sort of like went all in and started like developing it as a product that I could package and put in the marketplace.
Okay, you mentioned ChatGPT. We're going to cover that in a second because that's really interesting. But who is MetaShoot for? Because we've seen very recently that Unreal Engine 5 is definitely coming out of the game engine realm.
They are already deep into movie and cinema, and now with
virtual production.
Production, and now they are entering different domains as well. They want to take over everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So different industries are now looking at Unreal Engine 5, and the wider use cases are making themselves apparent. Product visualization is something that you're working on and focusing on here. Who is this product for? If people are listening right now, is it for 3D artists? Is it for companies? What kind of companies should they look into this? Because I just want to figure out who was your target audience when you created this product.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like the people that are going to relate the most to with MetaShoot are people that come from either physical photography, and because in Unreal Engine you have like the virtual studio that sort of breaks that gap between not understanding how the lights work in 3D versus actually seeing them work in real time and sort of like feeling related to how it works in the physical world. So that's one of the probably the target audiences. Another one, probably the biggest, is sort of like people that come from product visualization backgrounds in other software, something like Keyshot or Cinema 4D or 3ds Max and so on. And if they want to make the move to Unreal Engine, which is something that I don't think it was thought of in the last years, that this industry could like move to this software. I think I'm trying to enable that in some sense, trying to make it easier for them to sort of like bridge that gap between classic visualization and real time. Because one of the main advantages that I find with Unreal Engine is that once you have your products and everything set up in a MetaShoot studio, you can use them for video games, interactive apps, any sort of like interactive experiences, virtual production for films and so on. So that's probably like the main target, like product visualization and so on. But I'm also trying to open it up to all sorts of like architectural visualization, for example. You can use the lights there. Up to the previous version, like the current version, only for architectural visualization, you might only need like the camera and the target system. But for this new version that I'm developing, and that's going to come out in just a few weeks, I'm adding a whole new tab with motion presets, like camera motion presets. So with one click, you can select a camera and it adds the whole rail and it creates the sequence for it. It keys everything in place. It adds the camera to the sequence and all that. And I've sort of automated this with several presets for camera motion. So classic motions like track and like dolly and pedestal and so on. So again, trying to make it like relatable for people that know sort of like that sort of thing, but also accessible for beginners and people that don't know much about the process.
Dude, it was super easy to use the plugin. It's just like you get in, you know how to use it. And just like you mentioned, what's really cool about it is how it mimics the real life photography. And if you know your way around the real life photography, you'll almost immediately get how it works within your plugin. If your plugin doesn't exist, I imagine it's harder for other people. For me, for you who know Unreal Engine, it's fine. We can get in there and figure out our own settings. But what your plugin does is, if I don't use Unreal Engine 5, like you mentioned, coming in as a beginner, it's the perfect way to enter Unreal Engine 5 and just learn your way around it. Because all you need to do is be able to drag the target, and then the lights will just automatically adjust to that as well, which was really cool to see. By the way, that was a very cool touch.
One more thing that I saw a lot of people have problem with is the render settings and the render options. And in our previous meeting, you mentioned that you are working on creating a templated render setting. Is that coming in the new version too?
Yes, yeah. Okay. So there are going to be a few presets to just get things like the format for Reels, for like Instagram stories and all that. So you get automatically that format both in the render and in the camera, because you have to adapt both. So this does it automatically. Things like square rendering as well, but also things like just selecting like a single shot if you want to take just one single frame, or like multiple shots and just define the frame rate, like the frame duration and all that. I'm sort of like trying to simplify that whole process to use like a couple of clicks.
I love that. And there's also another target audience, I imagine, in the middle there, which is what we sort of started as when we started Bad Decisions just for fun. We were we're creating these sneakers based off of Air Jordan 1s and
virtual sneakers, and anime, mix of anime and
exactly
AJ1, yeah.
And what we did was, when we created them, we were spending time on showcasing them for social media, and all we wanted to do was just create a video about it. And creating the camera movement and the lighting was something that took a lot of time. And I now imagine there's so many 3D artists. A lot of them work with Marvelous Designer, and they just want to create clothing and they want to showcase that on social media. Or maybe I create sneakers, maybe I do products. And these are not, exactly. But these are not actually made in real life. They're just doing them as a portfolio, going back to where we started this conversation, to showcase their skills. Having your product can help them. I just imagine it can help them speed up the end process, so they can just focus on, I'm just going to model this, texture this, and boom, I put it in MetaShoot, and I just have the lighting there, and it works perfect. And I can adjust it if I want to, or I don't. There's already presets, how many presets have you created?
For the lighting, there are 10 at the moment.
10 presets. Are you planning to increase that in the future as well?
Yes, yeah. I want to make more variations. I want to sort of like separate the presets for the studio and sort of like the environment, and the presets for use the pure lighting and how they are set up. But yeah, there will be probably in 2 versions after.
Yeah, that'll be really sick, because I think that's definitely one way. I imagine most of my followed accounts on Instagram are all other 3D artists who are constantly just showing up what they created, and I can just imagine all of those with MetaShoot. So that's definitely one use case I can see it, and it's going to be a fascinating one. But I definitely recommend everybody watching as well, or listening, if you have the time, check out MetaShoot. We'll leave the link to MetaShoot as well in the description. And also the update that you mentioned, it's going to be an exciting one, because...
When is it coming, the new update? Is it in September or October?
Planning for the second half of September, yes.
Second half. And is it an upgrade to the current version? Or so imagine if someone is listening to this podcast now, can they buy the current version and then they'll be upgraded to the second version, or they should wait for the new version?
It's going to be a free upgrade for any current users. And once the new version is out, the licensing system is going to change slightly, but I'm going to make sure that all the current users don't have to pay anything for it.
Okay. And how much does the plugin cost?
At the moment, it's $250 US dollars in the marketplace.
Okay. In Epic Marketplace. And do they buy it on your website as well, or no, it's directly just from Epic Marketplace?
At the moment, it's directly from the marketplace, but with the new version, I'm also developing a new sort of like purchasing system through the website, allowing for things like subscription models if you want to get it just for like 1 month, or like try it out like as a demo and things like that. So yeah, that's coming.
That's a very good idea. I always have that thing as well when I want to see a new product or test it out, and I might even love the idea of using it, but what if I just want to give it a try? So you're adding that into the whole... That's amazing.
Faraz is a big critic of the pricing plans and the subscription plans. No matter what software he opens, whether it's Netflix or a 3D software, he first look at the pricing plan and he start analyzing, okay, what are they offering? Why they are not offering me
it's
this?
Important. And I think, I understand why, like the pricing of things, I understand, because you have to look at the use case of it. But one thing I always love is the concept of subscriptions, so that if you don't want to commit, a full year or perpetual license, because you need to first try it out just to see if this is something you need, that's always a good idea to have subscription. So I didn't notice. I'm glad you're adding that. I want to ask you one thing that is not necessarily related to MetaShoot itself, but the concept of designing a plugin. This goes back to you wearing many different hats. And one thing I want to tell everybody, we started the conversation with how you can do so many different things. And one of the things I realized you do based on your own portfolio was you created a mini version of League of Legends, the game, as a fun project, and you coded that, which was a what the fuck moment for me, because I played a lot of League of Legends, and the fact that you just did that just to learn was crazy. There's a term we use in League of Legends. Do you play the game yourself, or did you just...
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
I still play.
So you know about solo carry, right?
Yes.
It seems like that's the perfect way to describe your characteristic, because you fucking take everything, every role, top, middle, bottom, support, carry, whatever. You solo carry the whole team. And this is, you wrote this. What you're doing right now with MetaShoot, 3D modeling, texturing, programming, blueprints, licensing, and registration, which is what I want to get to. There is a lot of people who might also be listening right now who are like yourself. They like to solve problems, right? They know a little bit of coding. They want to create their own plugin. How hard is it to develop a plugin for Unreal Engine 5 and actually put it on the marketplace?
So I was pretty fortunate to find a tutorial on YouTube that explains the basics for it. I don't know, I cannot remember who uploaded it. But there is this tutorial that sort of covers the basics of how to create a new plugin inside Unreal Engine, and then goes through the submission process to the marketplace. So that helps a lot. I feel it's like something like publishing plugin for Unreal Engine into the marketplace. I think you might find it that way. It's a series of like 7 videos and so on. So that helped me a lot to know that it's possible, at least, because that's something that before I watched those videos, I had no clue how to get started. So that made me realize that it was possible, at least. And once you have that sort of like basic knowledge of how to create a plugin, which is literally just like a couple of buttons in Unreal Engine, they've made it pretty easy. Then it's when you start developing, like going deeper into the C++ side of things. But you can actually do it with blueprints as well, for the most part. So even if you don't know much about coding itself, the blueprints allow you to do pretty much everything, which is, I find, fascinating. And I still use them to like sketch functions and sketch functionalities and things that I try to program later properly. But yeah, blueprints are awesome for that.
No, that's great.
It's great to hear that, you can actually create a plugin, because a lot of people have great ideas, and one of which that we recently tried also was a drone simulator which you could fly. So if people have ideas and if they are creating presets or templates, I think that's a great way to publish their presets to the...
Sorry, I'm laughing because our dog is literally barking in our face. It's the funniest thing. I'm sorry, I can't. It's almost hard to ignore it. He's a little hungry. He always likes to just look at us while we're doing the podcast, stare us in the eyes.
He's the third person in the podcast. He's always sitting in front of us.
But no, I'm really happy that you shared that, because like I mentioned, like Farhad said as well, I know there's always people who might be like yourself, but they haven't taken that final step of actually checking out some YouTube videos on, oh wait, I can actually do this. I can actually publish my own plugin and make it work. It's really good to know that's possible. And it's very clear that that's your characteristic. Again, going back to what you said, you don't want to give up, right? You want to keep going until the end, figure out how I can get this done. And that's why MetaShoot was born. And honestly, I'm super excited to work more with MetaShoot. We just tested it out a couple of times, but I'm thinking actually for our thumbnails of YouTube videos, because we always have like a hero object. Sometimes when we're scanning and doing photogrammetry, we actually tested out one of our photogrammetry objects with MetaShoot. And before, we had to either take them to Blender and then set up our scene, or even in Unreal set up the scene. Now we're like, okay, thumbnails are going to be much easier to do with MetaShoot. So yeah, just another reason why you could use it. But one thing I definitely recommend to people, now that you know there's going to be a monthly license that you can get to try it out, I would recommend, if you guys want to wait, you guys can wait a few weeks, right? Until the new update?
It's going to be around 3 weeks' time. Yeah.
Okay. We're holding you on and accountable for 3 weeks.
This podcast is going out tomorrow. It's not a podcast that you record and goes out next week. So your talk starts running tomorrow.
It's taking, the external pressure comes. It's not just at Weta Workshop. It's happening right here. No,
that's one thing though, like with the deadline, and that's sort of like an advantage and also a curse of being my own boss in that sense. Like I'm the only one pushing towards the development, but I find, good.
It's the only way to stop him from barking right now.
Cool. But I find that, I have to put myself deadlines and commit to them. But I also don't want to sacrifice the quality of the product for those deadlines. Like, I know that if there is something that I find worth it to wait for one more week to develop and release it 1 week after, I know that I'm gonna do that. So apologies beforehand if those 3 weeks are not met.
No, you don't have to apologize.
I promise it's gonna be for a good reason.
One question: do you have a Discord channel or anywhere people can go to check out the new updates and ask you questions if they have any?
Yes, yeah. So we have a Discord server where we run all the troubleshooting. There is a channel for like suggestions and feedback, which has been amazing. Like help from the users, just telling me how they find the plugin, which things they find like could be improved, or things that ideas that they could have for future versions. And so far I think I've tried to put them all together in every single update that has been coming out. And this new version is definitely bringing most of those. There is a Discord channel. I can pass you the link later.
Yeah,
and
we're going to put the link in the description so people can see.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's awesome to see like how the community is forming as well, like how people are starting to get more into product visualization in Unreal Engine and sharing their work and like sharing ideas between themselves and like solving them problems and stuff.
And dude, you created MetaShoot at such a right time, because Unreal Engine 5 was clearly, prior to this, the engine that you would go to after you finish modeling and texturing and all that. But now it's really funny the way Unreal Engine 5 places themselves in the community, because they started as the game engine and then rendering, for other softwares, they would just go there for the real-time benefits. But now you can almost see it that secretly they're increasing,
tools, yeah.
they're adding skeleton rigs now. You can do that within Unreal Engine 5. Modeling tools are slowly getting better. Eventually you realize, wait a second, I don't probably need to go to other softwares anymore. I can just do everything there, which is also really good time for MetaShoot, because if prior to this you needed to change something on your model, okay, I got to go back to Cinema 4D or Blender or Maya. Now I can probably just fix that within Unreal with the modeling tool. So I think all of this is going to come together, and MetaShoot is just going to keep getting better and better, of course, as you work on it. And with the feedback of the community, that's only going to get bigger and better. And you're working on this solo? On the whole thing?
On the development, yes. I work, Ross Shane helps me with all the marketing.
Great guy. We already met him on a call.
Yeah, he's awesome. He comes from Mocha for After Effects, and he's helping me a lot with getting the MetaShoot out there and the branding and moving it around. But for the development part, it's me on my own for now. Yes,
it's a solo carry.
Yeah, you gotta call it solo carry.
It's a solo carry. Yeah. I have one thing I wanted to ask. You, as a person that we discussed everything, and so far you've been into different industries, have done a lot of work, programming, creative work. If someone comes to you now and asks you that, I want to be in your position, where should I start? What should I learn? Where should I go? How would you reply him or her?
In 2023, of course.
I think a really general answer to that could be try to find out how everything that you use works. Like every part of the software that you use works in either like Unreal Engine or whichever 3D software. Like when you start learning about the what makes a 3D model in like mathematically, what makes a 3D model in a software work and all that, you start like learning about how to take advantage of that mathematical sort of knowledge of the 3D. So try to find out how everything works. Like ask to like why, how, like why is this doing this, and go as deep as you can. But also I don't know, like I feel like it's just it's being curious in general. Like you keep curiosity, like keep reflecting on what you know and what you don't know that you don't know, sort of thing. Like just be open to learning and so on. So
wow, there is something that I want to highlight. Today is episode 29, and we had guests from different domains. We had 3D artists, we had people from F&B industry, managers, entrepreneurs. The interesting thing that me and Faraz are realizing is the similarity in answers and in traits. One, which Faraz mentioned in the beginning, of not giving up, which you mentioned. And the second thing of being curious. Yeah. This is, I think, the 5th or the 6th time that a guest on our podcast mentions this. And they highlight that it's so important to be curious. It's actually not so important what software do you choose or what job do you choose. It's more important than be curious and finding out about the things that you do.
Yeah.
And
so, for example, if the render you do turns out beautiful, don't just take that. Understand why that render is better than other softwares. What exactly is ray tracing doing to make that better? What exactly is path tracing doing to make it better? Why is path tracing taking more time to render than the other renderers? That's always the thing that I think makes learning all of this more fascinating, just being curious about that. And the funny thing is, I understand there's so many artists who probably don't even know that. They're using these softwares every single day. They don't actually know how they work. And I think that's probably something that, based on your answer and based on what we found, is limiting them from going above and beyond. And knowing all of these things might seem like a task that might not be super meaningful at first because you're telling yourself, I don't really need to know how it works. But I think eventually the bigger picture is you will. And there will be times where knowing all of those information is going to help you create a better picture, a video, or a product. And clearly that's the case for you. I just want to say thank you again for your time. You've been wonderful. We learned so much, and just understanding your whole experience. We can't wait to break MetaShoot and play around with it even more, and can't wait for a new update. We recommend everybody check it out as well. Links are all going to be in the description. And yeah, thank you so much again for your time, and for everybody listening and watching. We'll see you guys on another episode. Until then, ciao.